Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Hello, and today's guest is Lauren Chater, author of The Lace Weaver. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, Claudine.
How are you today?
I'm great, thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Incredibly, The Lace Weaver is your debut novel, and it was released earlier this year by Simon & Schuster. Can you tell me a little bit about your book?
Sure. So The Lace Weaver it's a historical fiction novel set in World War II, and it tells the story of two women, one Estonian and one Russian, who woman who has sort of Estonian heritage, and their stories are interwoven by the knitting of this beautiful Estonian lace, which is a way for the women of Estonia to pass down traditions and a way for their voices to be heard in a time of oppression when Estonia has been occupied by the Soviet Stalin's Russian Soviets.
Fantastic. Just looking up various websites last night and, in preparation for this interview, it occurred to me, just reading reviews of the book, that it's been so well received and deservedly so. I found it utterly compelling and I couldn't put it down when I read it. Can you tell me what was the inspiration for the book?
Thank you. That's really kind. So the inspiration for the book actually came when I was working in my local library, and I stumbled across a book on knitted Estonian lace. And when I opened it, I actually, to my shame, didn't know where Estonia was. I didn't know much about Estonia, but I was intrigued by this amazing sort of story of this country that had been occupied so many times, first by the Danes and then by the Germans, the Baltic Germans, and then the Soviets and the Nazis, and then again the Soviets after World War II reverted back to the Russians. And so they only gained their independence in 1991. But the shawls, to me, had withstood all these terrible upheavals, and I wondered if the shawls could be a voice for these women who had been oppressed and a way for them to connect to their past and also to connect to each other. And the lace circle, or the knitting circle, which is part of the story, became a sort of centre for the women. A place where they could discuss things that they wouldn't necessarily be able to say outside of that circle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I must say that it was that aspect of your novel, the legacy of shawl making, that you rightly describe as being at the heart of your story, that absolutely captivated me. And was it something that you consciously wanted to do, i.e. to make that the heart of your story, or was that something that evolved organically as you were writing it?
I think it was there in the initial drafts, but it wasn't really until my editor suggested that this was the actual heart of the story that I realized because I think when you're writing, a lot of the time it's very subconscious. And well, for me, it is anyway. I don't plot a huge amount of the story, so I just let it all flow. And sometimes you need that eagle eye to go back and say, actually, this is what your story is about. It's hard to interpret that as you're writing.
Yeah.
There's two different brains, that you're using there, the editing brain and the writing brain. So it wasn't really until my editor suggested to me that could be that could be the real focus of the story that I realized that she was right.
Absolutely, and it was just absolutely captivating for me, and maybe that's because it was, it was something that I recognised. Knitting and crochet has been part of my own family history, and a way of connecting, with older generations, and also as a way of me connecting with my daughter, and a way of passing down our cultural heritage. So for me, that was just a really fabulous part of the story, which really held my imagination.
Oh, that's really good to hear. I was worried that it would be boring, the people sitting around knitting. I mean, lots of people might not want to read that. But good editors can show you where to slow down and that was obviously a scene that needed to be expanded, and for me to just slow down the action of the story and focus on that. It's like the slow movement, almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because people are into that now. And so sometimes, they have these ideas about stuff that you don't even think of yourself. So I was really pleased that it turned out that way.
Well, obviously it has resonated with so many people, because I've just read so many comments where people have really been captivated by that aspect of the story. Reading the knitting circle scenes kind of made me feel like I was there watching the women work. I guess for me it was a testament to your skill as a writer, that you've been able to describe it so beautifully. But it also made me wonder whether you had been a knitter, or whether you are a knitter.
I'm a bad knitter. I have to confess. I think knitting is amazing and a real craft. But I have two small children, and I just don't have time to dedicate myself to knitting. And now I have the writing, which is, another craft in itself. And so it's on my bucket list one day that I will knit one of those beautiful Estonian shawls. But I did spend a lot of time with knitters, interviewing Estonian knitters, and also when I was writing, I would often write at my local library, and they have a knitting group. So I would sit there and sort of listen to what just the general chit chat, and as they're knitting away, because they knit blankets, I think, to send to disadvantaged children and things like that in other countries. And so it was just interesting to me to let hear the conversation just sort of flow, and for them, and to sort of I was just like the fly on the wall there listening to them. So
how fabulous. That's brilliant. And I guess I asked that question because I know you're a skilled baker. So I guess for me, it wouldn't have been a stretch to know that you were, skilled at knitting as well. That's really interesting. You've written two very strong female protagonists in this novel, and I wondered, were they inspired by real people?
One of them is Kati, the Estonian girl, who is my sort of main protagonist. She's an imaginary creation that I needed to invent her in order to tell that side of the story. But as I was doing my research, I came across a book called Stalin's Daughter by Rosemary Sullivan, and I was just so fascinated by this idea that Svetlana Stalin was Stalin's only daughter, and she had a very fraught relationship with her father. Her mother killed herself when she was, I think, about 9, which is really tragic. And it was all covered up. And as she got older, I think when she was in her teen years, she finally sort of started to understand the truth about who her father was, his involvement in her family members being arrested and tortured and things like that. And so I wanted to use her as an example to show that the Russians didn't just, Stalin's regime didn't just hurt the Baltics. They actually hurt their own people and their own families. Yes. And so I had to create a character who, without giving it away, has this sort of interesting parentage, because Svetlana Stalin, I couldn't have used her. It was just the timelines didn't match up. But I did use her, lots of her life as inspiration for Lydia's story. And she did have a boyfriend, actually. His name was Kapla. He was a Jewish film director. When she was 16, she fell in love with him. And Stalin had him arrested and sent to Lubyanka, which was the prison. So that part of the story that I was inspired by actually a true event.
Fascinating. So I wondered then, was it difficult to navigate the path between fact and fiction? How did you balance, taking elements of Stalin's daughter's story and weaving it into your story? Yeah,
it was hard, but I'm always a fiction writer first, I think, and so the story to me comes first.
Yeah.
I'm not 100%. Dedicated to telling the truth of something, because I think a lot of the times truth is subjective anyway, really. And as people want to be entertained by a story, even if it makes them uncomfortable, or it still has to be compelling. And so they're not going into this sort of book expecting nonfiction. So I had to make it as real as I could within the confines of the story. So there were certain facts that I changed, maybe one or two dates towards the end, but mostly it was as true as I could make it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it was fabulous. So we touched a little bit on the amount of research or the kind of research that you did, but I just wanted to say that your attention to detail in the novel is sublime. Is absolutely sublime. So I guess, how much time did you spend researching the novel before you actually put pen to paper, so to speak?
I spent about 2 years researching and writing. So I would say that I spent maybe a year researching it, but it was sort of part-time because I was working as well. So I was reading a lot. I was just reading, and I don't even think I made notes in those early stages because I was just trying to immerse myself in Estonian culture, imagine what it would be like to be Estonian. So that was what I did in the initial stages. I also traveled to Estonia and did interviews and went to Haapsalu, the little seaside village, talked to the there. And so that was all really important research, I think. And I was reading the other day, I'm putting together a workshop about writing historical fiction, and there's a really good diagram that somebody's done of the cultural iceberg. So up the top is sort of all the very basic things like literature, music, food, but underneath are sort of the attitudes to marriage, to money, the way that people interact with each other. So you want to get the really good stuff is all down the bottom,
Absolutely.
So that comes from deep research.
Absolutely. Well, it definitely shows in your book. So historical fiction, it's a supremely popular genre in Australia. It runs second only to crime or thriller novels.
Wow.
Were you always intent on writing historical fiction?
It sort of found me. I've tried writing a lot of different things before I wrote this, and I had sort of 3 or 4 novels on the go at one time. But this was the one that I had to stick with, and it seemed to resonate when I sent chapters to friends to read and things like that, my writers group. That this was the one that they really wanted to read. So I think, I don't know. I love historical fiction, but I feel like it more found me rather than me going out to look for it specifically. I'm just more interested in story rather than a particular genre.
Sure.
So I would write anything, I would write anything as long as the story was really interesting.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
So this is a bit of a tricky question, but I guess, and that's not to say that your book is like anything else that I've read, because it's such a unique perspective on World War II. Something I didn't know anything really much about Estonia, quite like you. So for me, reading it was incredibly illuminating. But if you were to compare your books or your book to anyone else's writing, who would it most closely resemble?
Who would it most closely resemble? It's such a hard one, isn't it? Because it is a strange, it's a strange book. It's not a strange book, but it's different. As I was writing it, I was reading The Nightingale by Christine Hanna. Yeah, so I was reading that, and I'm not sure if maybe elements of that came through with the female friendship and the and sort of the horror as well of the war. So I think maybe it may be that kind of story, especially with the emphasis on the women.
Yes.
And I think in that particular novel, she's quite heroic, isn't she, Isabel?
Incredibly so.
Yes. And so maybe that kind of strong character as well, I was trying to emulate with Kati. But I think that might be the closest.
Yeah, I guess it just gives people an idea if they've read The Nightingale, then they'll definitely enjoy the Lace Weaver. Absolutely, because I definitely enjoyed both of them, and they both had such different perspectives as well. You have a non-fiction title coming out in October, I've read, based on your blog, The Well-Read Cookie. That's really exciting for baking and reading enthusiasts. How did that come about?
So it actually started baking biscuits in, I think, 2014. I just had my daughter, and I wasn't able to write a huge amount because obviously she was newborn phase, and sleep deprivation was high on the agenda. But I wanted to do something creative still, to keep my hand in. and I wanted to start a blog, and I had started a blog, I think maybe a year before, but I just couldn't get it going, and I wasn't interested in writing it because I thought there's so many blogs out there that do exactly this. They review books and they say why they like them, where they don't. And I don't think that my blog was particularly unique in that sense. So I thought, what if I baked cookies inspired by my favorite books, and then I wrote a little review of them. And I did a bit of Googling, a bit of sleuthing, and there was no one else doing anything like that. And so I thought I would try it. I taught myself to bake cookies. I read a lot of blogs and basically just practiced. I baked cookies every week, for about a year before my husband said, these are actually okay. They actually look all right. And then I sort of sold some of them at markets and things like that. But I kept the blog going. And so then when I got my book deal for The Lace Weaver, I said, I can also do this, and it helped sort of build a bit of a fan base. And it's also just really nice to interact with other readers and share good books and things like that. So they said, oh, why don't you write a cookie book as well? And so that was how that came about. And it's been an interesting journey.
I'm sure it has.
Yeah.
Just looking at your Instagram posts last night, I was truly amazed at your skill and the fact that you taught yourself. And that royal icing, it's not that easy to work with. So you've done an amazing job. And yeah, some of those cookies were just divine to look at. I mean, the Gone with the Wind one was just beautiful.
Thank you.
And the Lace Weaver ones were pretty good too. I was very impressed with those ones. So look, I'm really excited about that non-fiction title. I'm a baking enthusiast myself, so I truly appreciate the skill and the patience required to make such beautiful pieces of art, essentially is what they are.
Yeah, royal icing is not easy to use. You're right. Yeah, absolutely. I used to be terrified of it. So
it is terrifying.
Yes, it is. So you can conquer your fear, like me.
Absolutely. So are you working on another fiction title?
I'm currently working on my second fiction book, which is called Gulliver's Wife, and that is due out next year. And then I'm also sort of working on the one after that as well.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, that's what happens when you get into the publishing sort of cycle. But that's really exciting too. It's just hard to you've got to focus on the one that you're working on before you move on. So I'm just in the planning stages of that one now, and I'll be going over to research in Amsterdam next year for that one. So
fabulous. Well, we'll have to stay tuned to learn a little bit more about that one as it comes along. So I wanted to ask you, as a wife and a mother of two small children, with a writing career and a blog and baking biscuits, how do you fit this all in?
I just do everything really badly. No, I just, I don't know. It's very hard, isn't it? It's very hard to be a working parent. Every working parent probably feels this way. You always feel like you've never done enough. Every day it's just, it feels like there's so much more you could be doing. But you've got to prioritize, and some days I think you've got to be kind to yourself. So I try not to push myself past the breaking point. If my kids are home and they're really small still, I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and if my 4-year-old, wants to show me a picture or something, I can't yell at her to go away, and so I have to be mum for that. That 10 seconds, yeah, and sort of appreciate what she's done, because children are so young for such a short amount of time. So it is hard to juggle all those different plates at the same time. But I just try to do my best, and with the writing, I work hard. I don't procrastinate. Oh, I say I don't procrastinate. Everyone procrastinates. But if I procrastinate, I try to read. I try to at least be doing something that will help my practice, or at least relax my mind in an interesting sort of way. And so that's how I juggle all the things that I'm doing. But I don't know. Sometimes I feel like a huge failure. I'm sure we all feel like that. But
I'm sure we all do. Yeah. But I think you're doing a fabulous job. It is, as you say, it's not easy.
No.
So if listeners wanted to connect with you, Lauren, or to learn more about your books, where can they find you?
They can find me on my website, which is www.laurenchater.com or thewellreadcookie.com. And I think the links to my Facebook and Instagram and Twitter are all on those pages. So they can certainly contact me there. And I love hearing from readers, and it's just the best. I think it's the best part of the job, actually. You think that it would be getting your book out there, but it's actually connecting with people. It's the best.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Lauren, what an amazing journey you've been on so far. It's been an absolute delight and a privilege to chat to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.